Hello, YouTube family. Today we have 3 segments coming to you, so get cozy, grab something hot to drink, and let's go. Please like, subscribe, and follow for more. My life has been all over the place until last year, and I wanted to share my love for life now and why it went from deciding to end it all to deciding something even better. My name is Sarah. I'm a 49-year-old female, and I work as a nurse in a doctor's office. I didn't have the most exciting childhood. I was raised in Texas and in a very conservative, judgmental household. Basically, I was raised to believe all Christians are good, and if you aren't a Christian, you're going to hell. Also, my parents committed I don't know how many sins, and I would ask them why, and they'd say, well, I asked for forgiveness, so it's fine. Which was BS in my head. I didn't know how dirty Christians could be until I was a teenager. We'll start from the beginning. When I was 17, I got pregnant. My parents didn't tell us anything. Believe it or not, I didn't even know you could get pregnant from sex. My parents seriously told us that all babies came from the hospital, and you would swallow a pill, and the parents would kiss, and that is how babies were made. And I thought this until I was 19 years old. My parents were beside themselves, to say the least, when I got pregnant. They decided I would have the baby, and we'd go from there. And because we went to a Christian school, they backed my parents up. You know, lie after lie after lie. After the baby was born, my parents reminded me it would be better that they raise her as their own, and I would be the baby's sister. I did not like this idea, but of course the preacher suggested it, so I didn't have a choice. I signed my daughter over to my parents. If I could go back, I would. Had I known what I know now, which is I didn't have to give my baby up at all, but it is amazing what they lie to you about in Christian school. The preacher told me legally, since I was underage, all girls who got pregnant had to give the babies up to their parents. When I turned 18, I swallowed my fear and left. I couldn't stay there with my daughter right across the hall from me. I moved to Tallahassee when I was 18 and got married, had 3 children, got divorced, married again, and divorced again. And at 25, after all that, I went home for the first time since I left. I hadn't even called in 7 years. I didn't know who was dead or alive or if anyone had moved. I just packed up my kiddos and moved back to my home state. At that point, I didn't know if I was going to stay permanently, so I planned on bringing Emma, my daughter, back with me. I got home and found out my parents, along with my daughter, had moved to a 2-bedroom house since all my siblings but Emma were grown. I went to an aunt of mine's house who I had kept in contact with and asked her if she knew where they lived, because surprisingly, she never told me they moved. She told me she knew but didn't want to tell me because we never talked about them during our Sunday conversations, and she didn't want to upset me. It made sense. She told me also, had she known I was coming, she would have said something. I went ahead and stayed at my aunt's for a year and got a job, saved money, and got a 3-bedroom house. I still had not talked to my parents at all since I'd been back. I ended up deciding to wait until my daughter was 18 to tell her. A few years later, and one more divorce later, I decided to move back to Tallahassee so I could try and start over there. My aunt had passed away, and I had no one left there in Texas. My siblings and I weren't close because, like I said, I hadn't talked to anyone since I was 18. I even avoided going to my aunt's funeral to not see my parents. Fast forward to last year, I was newly divorced after being married for 16 years, and I really wanted my daughter in my life. By this point, I had had a relationship with her since she was 18, and she lived, and still lives, right beside me. One night, I decided to write her a letter. It was a hot summer night, and I remember reading a book about a woman who'd given her daughter up to her parents, and as I had tears in my eyes, I decided to write her a letter knowing very well it could turn out bad. I held the letter in my hand, the ink still wet from the pen. The words flowed from my heart, a story that had been buried deep within my soul for decades. It was a story of love, sacrifice, and a secret that had shaped my entire life. My dearest Emma, as I write this, my hands tremble with the weight of the truth I have carried for so long. You have always known me as your older sister, but today I must reveal the reality that has haunted me. You are not my sister, Emma. You are my daughter. I was only 17 when I found out I was pregnant. Our parents, strict and traditional, would never have accepted such a scandal. I was terrified and alone, with no one to turn to. Our mother, with a heart as cold as the winter winds, made the decision for me. She would raise you as her own, and I would be your sister. I remember the day you were born, a stormy night that mirrored the turmoil in my heart. When I held you for the first time, your tiny fingers wrapping around mine, I felt a love so fierce it nearly broke me. But I also knew I had to let you go, to allow you to grow up in a world where you were loved and accepted without the stigma of my youthful indiscretion. I'm so sorry I told you this way. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner or take you with me when I left at 18. All the things I regret, lying to you is the biggest regret I have. I'm so sorry for the pain my mother put you through. From what you have told me, I would have never left you there. Even though I knew she was mean and old, like a witch, I thought she would never hurt you. I love you, Emma, and if this changes the way you feel about me, or if it changes our friendship, I'm so terribly sorry. I just feel you should have known. The real reason I didn't tell you is because I was afraid of Mom, and since it has been 6 months since she died, I felt now was the best time as any to tell you. I love you with everything in me and hope we can move on from here. If you want, we will talk more about it after you read this. Sincerely with love, Mom or Sarah. I took the letter and put it in her mailbox. If you think it turned out good, it didn't. At first. A few hours later, she came to my door pounding on it. I answer. "What the hell?" she screams. "Are you fucking serious?" With tears starting to well up in my eyes, I say, "Yes." She told me she hated me and never wanted to speak to me again. Obviously, I didn't tell her the whole story, about her dad and stuff. When I was in high school, I was essayed by a senior football player, and that's how I got pregnant. I didn't want to tell her because he did go to jail for it. I just didn't want to relive the trial again, even with writing it down because it's a long, long story. But I knew I had to share it because I didn't want her to know she is half of a rapist's daughter. That doesn't bother me. I still love her and have never hated her. I guess it's because she looks nothing like him and more like me. She stormed out of the door before I could say anything else. 6 months went by, and while she still lived next door, she hadn't talked to me since. Because of this, I started drinking heavily when my other kids were at school or in bed, and one night, I felt so low I decided to take my own life. I did this with pills. I woke up in the hospital 2 days later. This is where I know people will get judgy, and if you haven't experienced depression along with extreme anxiety, you have no room to talk. My youngest son, who was 14 at the time, had heard me crying in my room and checked on me, and that is when he found me. I regret so much that I did this. I was in such a bad place, but I also regret my son finding me. When I woke up, Emma was sitting in the chair next to me, asleep, with a book lying on her chest. All I could do was silently cry while staring at my daughter. My daughter. I love those words. She is my daughter. I will try to shorten it up here. When she woke up, I told her everything, and I mean everything. I told her about her sperm donor dad and the extent of the abuse that went on in the house when I was a child. It's been a year since then, and we are closer than ever before. Thank you for reading my story. I live in a fairly secure area and have two dogs. One is a large Doberman and the other is a poodle. I was home alone as my parents were out for the weekend. Our dogs bark a lot as they are protective and the neighbors hate when the dogs bark. We often get notes telling us to keep the dogs quiet. One of the more threatening neighbors would hurt the dog if it wouldn't be quiet. So, my parents have them taken to a dog kennel to avoid any complications. I was home alone playing video games and watching movies for the weekend. It was the night after they had left, and I was playing a video game, and I think it was Rainbow Six Siege. I was playing with a few friends, and I had my microphone on. I was playing with my window open, and my friend kept telling me to stop making a squeaky sound. I questioned what he meant, and my friend said that there was a loud banging. I removed my headphones, and that is when I heard the sound of something slamming into the gate. I peered out. It was a tall, stocky man with a black hood looking down, slamming his body into the fence as the fence was weak and the wood was splitting. I decided to call the police rather than my parents, but decided to stay near the window. Still watching the man, I was talking to the 911 operator. The operator told me to lock myself in a room, get out of sight, and that the police officer was on the way. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to continue watching the man. He finally broke the wooden gate off its hinges, but he didn't enter. He strapped something around his shoulder, and upon further inspection, only from the moonlight, I saw a hunting rifle strapped to his back. That's when I went and hid underneath the bed and listened out for anything until a loud shatter broke the silence, which was the back door smashing, followed by the footsteps, and then I could tell he was entering the house. The intruder sounded like he was looking for something. He was creeping up the stairs until the sound of police sirens flooded my ears, and I made the stupid decision of bolting, trying to escape the house, and I started to get to the stairs and turned the corner and was greeted by a large man following the description of the man trying to break in. The man gripped my neck, the police sirens got louder, and then the police were knocking on the front door. I was quickly losing breath from the man strangling me. The cloth covering his face slipped down to reveal my neighbor. I was nearly out of breath. He let me go and gripped his rifle and aimed it at me, and then pulled the trigger. But it didn't fire. The dumbass left the safety on. The police kicked the door down and tased the man. The man was charged with breaking and entering and carrying an unlicensed firearm. I'm thankful that the safety was on because this could have ended very badly. I later went to my Xbox and told my friends what happened and that I almost died. Okay, so this is my first official post here, but I have to share this story. It happened about 3 years ago. I live in the United States. I was a 6'1", 210-pound, 23-year-old white male college student that was living in a predominantly Hispanic low-income neighborhood when this occurred. About 5 minutes after my Pizza Hut shift one night, I decided to walk across the street to buy a couple tall boys at my local liquor store. Excited about it being the weekend and getting to sleep in the next morning. I know I had no life. So, as the cashier was handing me my bag of booze across the counter, a muffled yet short female scream reverberated throughout the store just from outside. I distinctly remember how pitiful it sounded. The cashier and I made that certain eye contact where you're both just like, what the heck? After a brief silence, he just shrugs his shoulders slowly and tells me to be careful getting home. I nod my head and start out after giving him a gracias from over my shoulder. I know it seems like we may have underreacted, but honestly, you see and hear a lot of crazy stuff in this city, especially at night. So in addition to not wanting to get mixed up in something, you don't just call the cops over anything. Especially a random scream. Even with that being said, thinking about how pitiful it sounded gave me a mixture of disgusted anger and cold fear. My heart was speeding up at this point. I opened the liquor store door slightly and looked around outside. After hearing and seeing nothing but traffic for about 15 seconds, I decided to start walking home, head down, eyes and ears open. But as soon as I rounded the liquor store corner, I was greeted by an obviously intoxicated but somehow steady, short, stocky Hispanic man with a scratched up face and a really stretched out shirt. Assuming he was one of the few drunks that live in a small but dense patch of forest about 12 feet behind the store, I completely disregarded him and continued walking. At first, something about his behavior caught my attention. He looked extremely nervous, as if he were up to something. Also, I could hear a faint, almost non-existent gurgle-like sound coming from the trees. Immediately, I began to suspect he had something to do with the scream I'd heard just minutes before. Upon making eye contact, he caught on fast that I suspected him. "How are you?" he awkwardly asked me in Spanish, smiling way too much and motioning for me to follow him into the darkness behind the store. I pretty much told him to kick rocks and continued walking home at a much faster pace now, looking behind me every 16 or so steps. I began wondering what the hell that noise was coming from the woods and why that man was acting so shady. Maybe I was overreacting, though. Maybe the sound was just an old pipe or drain nearby. Maybe he really was just drunk and didn't want me to call the cops on him for public intoxication or something. I now wish, with everything in me, I would have called the police then and there and gone in the store and waited. About 5 minutes later, while walking down the particularly dark and isolated stretch of road about a half a mile before my apartments, out of nowhere the man I had just seen burst through some shrubbery about 12 feet from me wielding a freaking machete. That's right, a machete. Honestly, you can't make this stuff up. I immediately went into panic mode and threw my beers at him and began to run as fast as my legs would carry me towards my apartment buildings, hoping I had enough strength left within me to make that walk. I now realized I should have ran back towards the store as it was closer, but as I stated, he came from behind me and the rest is instinct. He was initially so close behind me, I swear I could hear the blade cutting the air as he swung it at me from behind. I honestly expected a machete blow to the neck or head or anything else at any second. That's a very unique, very hard state of mind to be in, knowing that you could die at any moment. The worst, most gruesome thoughts of me being murdered began to fill my mind. Would I trip only to have a defensive arm hacked off right before my eyes, or would I be half decapitated mid-stride, falling hard and bleeding out as any other parts of my body were cut off? Tears began to fill my eyes as I thought of how my family would feel knowing I was hacked to death, bleeding out on the side of the dark road again. I began to scream, half out of desperation to live, the other half out of fear and not wanting to die such a horrible death. I know it sounds bitchy, but you can't really judge until you're being chased down with someone who literally wants to hack apart your body until you die. I'll try to shorten the story up a little now. Yes, I eventually made it home. Some part of me knew I'd lost the guy way before getting there, but my fear and adrenaline refused to let me stop running. I collapsed as soon as I made it inside and tried to focus on not going into cardiac arrest from not only running so hard, but out of fear for my life. I tried to remember everything I'd learned in the Army about the 2-mile recovery drill. It helped a little. Anyone who's been in even a remotely similar situation can understand why I never called the police. After much needed water and heavy breathing, it was 30 minutes before I could even put a chain of complete rational thoughts together due to the shock and mental, physical exhaustion caused by what just happened, by which time the guy would be long gone. I remember all I could think about was how the hell I didn't hear him getting that close to me after 5 whole minutes of walking, especially with him being under the influence and me being sober. Needless to say, after double checking all the doors and windows, I fell into a paranoid sleep, gripping a kitchen knife soon after. The next day I came to find that a young teenage girl had been essayed and killed behind the same store around the time I had been leaving the previous night. Her throat had been and her body dumped not far from where she'd been essayed. Every person that lived behind the store was tested against the semen found inside the girl's body, and not one was a match.